What's up, mobile devs? In this video we are going to make this amazing sliding counter animation from scratch. To make it, we are going to use extensively reanimated shared values, and we are going to use the pan-gesture-handler from the react-native-gesture-handler package. However, the secret for this animation lies behind the concept of the interpolate function. So if you're not familiar with this function, don't worry, because I've already made many videos about it, and the links are all in the video description. So if you love React Native animations, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to be updated on my upcoming videos. By the way, I want to say that this animation is inspired by a dribble animation made by Ehsan Rahimi. I hope honestly that the pronunciation is correct. So with that said, we can finally move on the code section. So here I've created a React Native project with the TypeScript configuration by using the Expo CLI. So we can see in the package.json that I've already installed the reanimated package, the gesture handler package, and the Expo vector icons package, since we are going to display some icons. So for now we can already start actually to get rid of this code and to display the first, let's say the first version of our sliding counter. So let's define a height equal to 70, a width equal to 150, and a background color equal to a fancy black. So let's reload. Let's fix the border radius. Let's say border radius equals 250, and let's increase a little bit the width. So since inside this view we are going to do a lot of things, let's create a components folder, and let's create the sliding counter component. So here I'm just using the React Native snippets from Visual Studio Code, and let's copy this view right here inside this component. So let's import the sliding counter, and we are good to go. So inside this view we are going to display first of all the icons, so 3 different icons, and we are going to display on top of the clear icon. So here we are going to place the minus, the clear, and the plus icon, and on top of the clear icon we are going to display the circle. Inside the circle, so the circle will be wrapped with a pan-gesture handler, and we are going to animate the circle inside the sliding counter. So let's start to add the icons. Let's use undesign from Expo vector icons. So the first one will be the minus. Let's say color equal to white. The second one, so let's copy. The second one will be the clear icon. So in order to use the clear icon in undesign, we need to specify close as the name of the icon. And here let's say plus. So we can see, we can almost see the 3 different icons. We need to fix here the style. Let's say align item center, justify content center, and let's say flex direction row. So of course let's increase a little bit the size. So let's define the icon size constant equal to 20, and let's fix, let's assign the icon size to all the icons. So let's update also the justify content option, and let's specify space evenly. So we are good to go. So from this point, we just need to add the circle on top of this icon right here. So let's define a view, and let's say, let's actually define a height equal to 50, a width equal to 50, since we want a square. Let's say as background color, actually this kind of gray. So here it is. And since we want to use a circle, let's say border radius equal to 25. So of course we don't want our circle right here. So let's fix and let's add position absolute. let's also wrap this circle inside a view. So basically, I'm just going to center this circle on the top of this clear icon. So here I'm using this kind of styling technique, but of course you can do it in a lot of different ways. So here the wrapper will have an absolute fill object, and let's let's center with align items and justify content this circle. So here we go. So actually the styling is a little bit harder than Reanimated itself. So basically this view, I believe we need to wrap and animate this view right here. So in order to animate this view, of course, we are going to use an animated view. So here animated is imported from, must be imported from reanimated. And let's wrap the view with the pan-gesture-handler. So of course the pan-gesture-handler is imported from react-native-GestureHandler. So let's refactor a little bit this style right here by using the style option from React Native. So here let's say button. Let's say styles.button. Here this one is the circle style. Let's call it circle. So everything looks great. So of course we need to handle the pan event. In order to handle the pan event, let's create the on pan gesture event, and let's assign to the on pan gesture event the result of the hook use animated gesture handler. So if you're not familiar with this hook right here, I've done a bunch of tutorial on this hook. I will put the link in the video description. But what you need to do basically is that with this hook you can handle a lot of different gesture handlers. So since here we are going to use the pan gesture handler, let's specify here pan gesture handler gesture event. So with this hook we can handle also a bunch of different callbacks. And for now let's just handle the onActive callback. So here let's access the onActive event, and let's actually print the translationX event. So of course nothing is working. We need to assign the on pan gesture event to the pan gesture handler. And we can see here that the translationX is printed finally. So since we want to assign the translationX, since we want to animate and translate this view right here, we need to pass this translationX inside a shared value, and later we need to pass the shared value inside the reanimated style. The reanimated style in the end will be passed to this animated view. So let's define the translateX shared value. So the initial value will be equal to 0, will be 0. And let's assign to the translateX value this event.translationX. So we need to pass this translateX value inside a reanimated style. So usually I like to define the reanimated style with this kind of syntax. And let's say useAnimatedStyle. So useAnimatedStyle is an hook provided by Reanimated. Here we can just return a common React Native style, and let's pass here the translateX value. So in the end, let's just pass this reanimated style to this animated view. So let's see if everything is working. And we can see that we can nicely translate on the horizontal axis this circle. So of course there are a lot of issues. First of all, we want that when we release the finger, the circle returns back here. So in order to fix this behavior, let's just specify here the on-end callback, and let's say that on the end of the animation, we want that the translateX value returns back to value 0 with a spring animation. So withSpring is an high order function provided by react-native-reanimated. And let's see here the result. So we can see that the animation looks great. So actually, for this specific animation, probably we can specify also the stiffness equal to 200. And we can see that the animation is, let's say, actually 300, just to see something. Maybe it's too much. I hope that 100 will be fine. So actually, don't specify at all this stiffness. Probably the default options are always the perfect options. So that said, of course, we need to clamp the circle translation X. So here we can see that we can translate over the sliding counter. We shouldn't be able to do that. So in order to clamp this circle, let's define here the clamp worklet. So let's say clamp. We have done this function a bunch of times. Basically, here we just want to clamp, so we need to specify the value of type number, the minimum of type number, and the max value of type number, and we want to return the max value. I believe here we need to say min, so we want to clamp here the value with the minimum value. So we want to return the max value between the value and the minimum value. And here we need to wrap this result with the max. So I think that this version should be fine. So here we need to specify the worklet keyword because we are going to use the clamp function inside one of this method. So if you're not familiar with this kind of notion, so this kind of worklet functions stuff, shared value, and this hook right here, feel free to check out my first video on this series that is called actually Introduction to Reanimated 2, and I hope that it will clarify all your doubts. So that said, we want to clamp this translation X. So let's call it here clamp. This one is the value. We need to specify the minimum value and the maximum value. So we know that we know actually that the button width is equal to 170. Let's actually refactor a little bit here the width. Let's say 170 right here. So let's pass here the button width, and here we can clamp by using by referring to the button width. So let's define the max slide offset proportional to the button width. So let's say that it should be equal to button width multiplied by 0.4. And the minimum value should be equal to max slide offset and the maximum value to max slide offset. So let's reload. So we can see that it is almost working fine. Let's actually use 0.3. And we can see that everything is working as expected. So we are clamping the animation. So to be honest, these values are based on experimental values. So of course, use whatever value you want or is fine for you. I'm just defining the max slide offset to this value because it is working at least as expected. So what we need also to do. So basically when so first of all, we need to assign here the opacity. We need to animate the opacity of the icons. The actually the clear icon should be invisible at the beginning. So here let's just say opacity equal to 0 for the close icon. And here we need to focus on the animation related to the minus and the plus icon. So in order to do that, let's define here another reanimated style, and let's call it reanimated plus minus icon style. So use whatever name you want. I think this one, it's clear, at least for me. And here we need to define the style that we need to assign to the to these icons right here. So usually you can just pass here the style, but you need to update the undesign to be an animated undesign component. But usually in this case, I think it's much more easy to wrap just the undesign icon inside an animated view and to pass this style right here inside the animated view, since we cannot pass a reanimated style to a common React Native component. So I hope that it was clear as an explanation. Just know that if you can always prefer to wrap a component inside an animated view and put the reanimated style and assign the reanimated style to the animated view, at least from my experience. So let's wrap here the undesign icon with the animated view, and let's also wrap the plus icon with the animated view. So here we can assign here the reanimated plus minus icon style, and here the reanimated plus icon minus style. So at this point we can start to animate the opacity. So let's define here the opacity, let's evaluate the opacity. And I think a good way to handle this opacity is just by interpolate this the translation x value. So let's use the interpolate. So we want that when we translate, we want that the opacity decreases. So let's say here translate x value. Let's define here the input range and the output range. So the translate x value is going to change between the value 0, so minus max slide offset, 0 and max slide offset. So in order to access the max slide offset value, let's put outside of the useAnimatedGestureHandler hook, and let's call it here. So the opacity, the translate x value is going to change between max slide offset, minus max slide offset, 0 and max slide offset. So I know it's a bit repetitive. And here we can say, we can use an opacity of 0, 0.8 and 0 or 1, for instance. So basically, whenever we translate to minus max slide offset or max slide offset, we want that the opacity decreases until value 0. So let's pass the opacity to the style and let's reload. So we can see that it is working nicely. We don't want that the opacity completely fades. So let's say 0.4 and 0.4 instead of 0. And we can see that everything is working as expected. So instead of using 1, let's just use a 0.8 opacity just to start with not a perfect white icon. So at this point, the missing piece is also that at this point we actually need also to animate the clear icon, so the close icon that for now we have fixed with an opacity equal to 0. And in order to animate this icon, we need first to handle the vertical axis. Since we are going to animate the opacity of the clear icon when the circle will be placed below the sliding counter. So let's start to create the translate y shared value. let's access here the translate y value equal to event.translationY. Of course, later we are going to clamp this value. And let's animate back the translate y value equal to with spring 0. So in the end, we just need to assign here the translate y value. So we can see that we are able to translate on the y-axis. Of course, we need to clamp. So in order to clamp, we can use the clamp function. So here we want to clamp with a minus, so the minimum should be equal to minus max slide offset, and the maximum should be equal to 0. So let's see. So of course, it's not correct. So we need to use 0 as minimum and max slide offset as the max value. And we can see that it is working fine. So here we can start to animate the clear opacity. So let's define here the reanimated close icon style equal to useAnimatedStyle, and let's actually handle here the opacity. We are going to use almost the same technique that we have used before. So we are going to interpolate the translate y value, and the translate y value will be updated between the value 0 and the value max slide offset. So let's update here the style, the input range, and at the beginning the opacity must be equal to 0, and later it will be changed to value 1 or 0.8, I think it's fine. So we need to assign the reanimated close icon style to this icon right here. So we can use the same technique that we used before, and we can wrap this undesigned icon with the animated view. And we are going to assign the reanimated style to this animated view. So let's pass here the reanimated close icon style, and let's reload. So we can see that the clear icon is fading nicely. But we need also to animate back, so whenever we scroll with the vertical direction, we need also to fade out these icons right here. So basically the opacity inside the reanimated plus minus icon style must depend on this opacity right here and this opacity right here. So how to do it? First of all, here let's say opacity X. Let's copy for now, later we are going to fix it, and let's say opacity Y. So this is the opacity of the Y direction. So here let's multiply opacity X with opacity Y. So basically I don't think it is the right solution. Of course it isn't. So let's say 1 minus opacity Y. So it is almost working, but don't use this approach. So basically we need to refactor a little bit this opacity Y in this context. So at the beginning here it must be equal to 1. And here, let's see, it must be equal to 0. We are going to understand. So right now I will explain these values. So we can see that it is working. Why it is working? Basically, we have already understood this opacity X interpolation, but we want that when we scroll to the end, so when the translate Y value is equal to max slide offset, this opacity right here should be equal to 0. So I've placed the 0 value in the end of the output range. And at the beginning, in this condition, if the vertical pan is equal to 0, we don't want that this opacity y influences this kind of final opacity. So it's a bit tricky, but I think that it is quite easy to understand why these values are working properly. So at this point, I think we just need to handle the count and of course the text in the middle of the circle. So in order to do it, let's define here a state, and let's use useStateHook from React. Let's specify here the count and the setCount function. So here inside this view right here, so inside the circle, we are going to define the text component from React Native, and we are going to place the count. So here it is. We need, of course, to update, to fix a little bit the style. So let's say styles.text, styles.count text, count text. Let's say, let's add a font size of 20 and a color equal to white. Of course, let's say 25. And at this point, we need to center this text. So we are going to define, we are going to center this text inside this circle style. So let's say justify content center and align items center. So we can see that it's working nicely. So what is missing? We need to find basically a way to update the count. So in order to update the count, we need to add some logic inside the onEnd of the useAnimatedGestureHandler hook. So here, let's focus on the increment and on the decrement action. So we want to increment the count when the translateX value is equal to max slide offset. We want to decrement instead the count when the translateX value is equal to minus max slide offset. So we can write this logic in the onEnd callback. So if translateX value is equal to max slide offset, we want to increment. Otherwise, if translateX value is equal to minus max slide offset, we want to decrement. So we can easily increment or decrement by using the function setCount. Here we can pass current count and current count plus 1. So here we can translate, and we can see that reanimated is complaining, and it is complaining about the fact that we are calling the setCount function, that is a function that needs to be executed on the JavaScript thread from the onEnd callback, and the onEnd callback actually is a worklet. So the worklet is a special JavaScript function that can be automatically executed on the main thread, so on the UI thread, and from the worklet we cannot call synchronously a function from a different thread. So here we can fix it by using the second approach. So possible solutions are that we can mark the function as a worklet. For instance, here we are using a JavaScript function, the clamp function, and we have marked it as a worklet. So here we have applied the first solution. But in this specific case, we need to use the second solution because we have not access to the setCount function. And the second solution is just to wrap this method with the runOnJS function. So runOnJS is a function that we need to import from Reanimated. So this kind of approach, in this specific case, it will not work. I don't want to execute right here because it will crash the application. But basically, here we have the documentation from Reanimated, and we can see that this special case is actually documented. So we can see that code like this may not work. So if we wrap an external library function, for instance, setCount is a function that is provided from useState, and useState is just from React, we can see that this type of code could not work. Instead, in order to solve the problem, we can wrap the setCount function inside a wrapper function, and we can execute with the run-on.js function the wrapper function. So let's see in practice what it's all about. So basically, let's wrap this code right here, and let's define here the increment count function. Increment count, and let's use callback. So use callback from React just for good practices, and let's call setCount. So basically here, so let's reload. This is the wrapper function, and this is the external library function. So here we can call run-on.js by calling increment function, that is the wrapper function. So let's see if it is working. And we can see that everything is working smoothly. So I hope that this explanation was clear. It is a kind of tricky situation because in this specific case, it isn't working by wrapping the external library function, but usually it may work. So check always if it is working without the wrapper function, otherwise create the specific wrapper function. So here we need to apply the same approach for the decrement count. So let's define the decrement count function. Here let's pass -1. And let's call run-on.js with decrement count here. And let's execute it. Let's see if it is working. And we can see that everything is working as expected. So the last action is the reset count. So we want to reset the count when the translate y is equal to max slide offset. So here we need to add another condition. So if translate y is equal to max slide offset, we want to reset the count. So we need to use the same approach that we used before. Let's say reset count. And here we can just set the count to value 0. So let's wrap it, reset count, and let's execute. So we can see that everything is working as expected. So just for the sake of let's say UI design, we need to add a final translation to this design right here. So basically, we can see that when we translate on the first video in the intro, also the button itself is translating a little bit. So for instance, if we translate to the right, also the button is translating a little bit to the right. And the same is valid for all the directions. So in order to fix it, we need to convert this view right here into an animated view, and we can define a reanimated button style with the useAnimatedStyle hook, and here we can return a new style with transform and pass the translate x equal to translate x value multiplied by 0.1, for instance. So, and let's pass, so here I believe it is fine. So translate y value multiplied by 0.1. So I think I'm missing something. So of course we need to, we have converted this view into an animated view. We need to fix the last parameter, the closing tag. So this reanimated button style has the same translate X value and the same translate Y value used by the pan-gesture-handler, but these values are multiplied by a small alpha. So let's add this style inside the main view. Let's reload. And we can see here this nice smooth translation by the sliding counter, by the external view. So I hope that this tutorial was clear. I think that it is quite interesting, a quite interesting animation. So thanks a lot for staying with me all that time. I hope that if you like this kind of content, you can subscribe to my channel. And if you have any kind of suggestion for future videos, feel free to leave a comment in the section below.